It began with a lie so unbelievable that even seasoned investigators struggled to wrap their heads around it. A wealthy CEO who convinced the world he was dead, while secretly watching the aftermath of his own death unfold from the shadows. A crumbling business empire, a desperate need for escape, and a mastermind who believed he could outsmart governments, insurance companies, and even his own family. What he didn't expect was that the smallest digital breadcrumb would expose everything. Tonight on True Crime News, we're diving into a deception so elaborate it feels scripted, except every moment happened in real life. A charming businessman sweeps a devout woman off her feet, proposes with movie-style romance, and builds a perfect blended family. But behind the candlelit dinners and mountain getaways, he is crafting an exit plan built on forged documents, false identities, and a death scene created out of thin air. As the world mourns him, he's living in the shadows, slipping across borders, hiding in secret rooms, and collecting the pieces of a life he was never meant to keep. But one mistake, one tiny oversight, will unravel everything he spent years constructing. And that's where this unbelievable story truly begins. Daphne's life had finally begun to settle after years of emotional upheaval. A devout woman with a gentle spirit, she was ready to rebuild. She wanted companionship, honesty, and someone who shared her faith. When she joined a religious dating website, she imagined meeting a humble, grounded man, never a millionaire CEO with a smile that could disarm anyone in seconds. But that's exactly who she found. Elias entered her life like a perfectly crafted blessing. His profile was clean, respectful, and filled with stories of struggle and triumph. A self-made immigrant, he claimed he built a thriving furniture company from nothing. He spoke softly, laughed warmly, and carried himself with the confidence of a man who had conquered life's biggest obstacles. Daphne was cautious at first, but it was impossible not to be drawn in. He praised her kindness, admired her dedication to her family, and made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in years. Their first in-person meeting sealed the connection. Elias arrived with flowers, a charming smile, and a calm assurance that made her trust him quickly. Within weeks, he had integrated himself into her daily routine, helping with errands, attending church with her, and bonding with her children like he had always belonged. Her family welcomed him instantly. He remembered birthdays, brought thoughtful gifts, and talked about building a future filled with love, stability, and faith. No one questioned him. Why would they? He looked like the answer to every prayer Daphne had whispered in the dark. Then came the proposal, lavish, dramatic, unforgettable. A candlelit dinner, a table covered in roses, and a towering diamond ring that sparkled under restaurant lights. Elias dropped to one knee and asked her to build a life with him. Daphne said yes through tears, overwhelmed by joy. Her family celebrated, her children adored him, and the fairy tale seemed complete. The wedding was intimate, simple, and perfect. A beach ceremony at sunset. Soft waves, warm sand, handwritten vows. For the first time in years, Daphne felt safe. She felt chosen. Elias promised to protect her, to love her children as his own, to build a family rooted in faith and loyalty. Those words would later feel like knives. Their honeymoon in the mountains only strengthened her belief that she had married her soulmate. They walked trails, cooked meals in a rustic cabin, and imagined growing old together. When Elias impulsively bought a secluded mountain property, she was surprised but excited. It felt spontaneous and romantic, until he insisted on adding a secret panic room during renovations. He said it was for security, something to protect the family. Daphne didn't question it. He seemed knowledgeable, protective, always thinking ahead. But the truth was far darker. Elias wasn't building safety. He was building a hiding place. For a few blissful months, life played out like a postcard. Family dinners, work trips, new home plans. But slowly, Daphne noticed a shift. Elias was distant, distracted, avoiding certain conversations. Then one night, he sat her down with tears in his eyes and delivered news that shattered her world. He claimed he was dying, an incurable brain disorder, something rare and aggressive. He said he contracted it during a military mission years earlier. The details were strange, but his sadness felt real. He showed her MRI scans. He had her speak to a doctor. Every part of the performance was convincing, but this wasn't a diagnosis. It was the opening act of the biggest lie he would ever tell. The moment Daphne began to accept the heartbreaking idea that her husband was dying, Elias twisted the narrative again, this time into something far more terrifying than any medical diagnosis. With trembling hands and a voice heavy with dread, he confessed that the illness was not real. The brain disorder, the MRI scans, the doctor, every bit of it had been fabricated. Daphne was stunned, confused, angry. But before she could even process the betrayal, Elias delivered a new story that swallowed her fear whole. According to him, his past as a special forces operative had resurfaced in the worst possible way. He claimed he had spent years hiding a violent secret, one tied to an assassination he carried out while serving on a covert mission. The man he killed, he told her, was a high-ranking cartel leader. That cartel, he said, never forgot. And now, after all these years, they had found him. He painted a chilling picture. Ruthless killers who had tracked him across borders, who would not hesitate to murder Daphne and her children just to send him a message. Elias described surveillance vans, coded threats, old comrades warning him in the shadows. Daphne didn't know anything about military operations or cartel retaliation, but Elias did. Or at least, that's what she believed. He was confident, believable, and heartbreakingly sincere as he told her they were all in danger. The only solution, he insisted, was for him to disappear completely. Everyone needed to think he was dead. His family, her family, the authorities, the supposed cartel assassins. If even one person suspected he was alive, he claimed, they'd all be hunted. Daphne was terrified. She didn't see manipulation or deceit. She saw a man risking everything to protect her family. She begged him to go to the police, but Elias said law enforcement couldn't protect them from international assassins. His story was so detailed, so emotionally charged, that she surrendered to his version of reality. The plan began immediately. Elias announced he was traveling to South America for experimental medical treatment, a cover story that explained why he would be unreachable. He wrote heartbreaking goodbye letters to his stepchildren and even recorded voice messages for Daphne to listen to after he was gone. Every word was crafted to break her heart and bind her loyalty. Then he vanished. Days later, Daphne received the dreaded call. Elias had died from his supposed disease. She collapsed, devastated. But even as she tried to mourn, Elias had already arranged the next step. He instructed her, through encrypted messages, to fly to Venezuela to retrieve his remains. He told her this was necessary to keep up the illusion, to convince everyone, including the cartel, that he was truly gone. Daphne obeyed, believing her family's lives depended on it. She flew to South America carrying a large sum of cash, just as he instructed. The trip was chaotic, frightening, and filled with inconsistencies she pushed aside because her fear was greater than her doubt. The most surreal moment came when she secretly met Elias, not a ghost, not a man dying from a disease, but her completely healthy husband, waiting for her in a quiet location far from public view. He hugged her, thanked her for protecting him, and handed her a forged death certificate. Then he told her to take the document to the U.S. Embassy to authenticate it, while he waited outside. She walked into the embassy holding lies in her hands, terrified but determined. When she returned to the United States, she carried an urn supposedly containing Elias's ashes. The family held a memorial service. Tears were shed, prayers were said. But the man they were mourning wasn't in a grave. He was already moving on to the next phase of his plan, one built entirely on deception and greed. With the world convinced Elias was dead, the next phase of his plan finally came into view. The money. All the emotional manipulation, forged documents, staged grief, and international travel were building toward one target: millions of dollars in life insurance. Daphne, still under the spell of fear and loyalty Elias had planted so deeply, believed she was fulfilling her husband's final wishes and protecting her family from the terror he had described. To her, filing the insurance claims wasn't fraud, it was survival. But insurance companies have long memories and sharp instincts. From the moment Daphne submitted the first claim, investigators noticed glaring red flags. A wealthy CEO with access to elite medical facilities supposedly traveled to a politically unstable region for treatment. A rare brain disease conveniently diagnosed overseas. A cremation arranged in a remote village that had no functioning medical infrastructure. Everything about the death felt off. As investigators dug deeper, the inconsistencies grew impossible to ignore. The location where Elias allegedly died was hours away from any hospital capable of treating advanced neurological conditions. The lodge he supposedly stayed at had been shut down for years, boarded up, abandoned, and overrun with vines. No patient records existed in local clinics. No witnesses remembered seeing a foreign businessman seeking treatment. Elias had staged his death in a place where no one knew him and where no one could verify his story. The cremation raised even more doubts. A body left in tropical heat for multiple days would have rapidly decomposed, making cremation nearly impossible without proper facilities. Yet the document Daphne provided stated the process was done within hours, in a town without a certified crematorium. It didn't make sense biologically, logistically, or legally. The story, when examined closely, crumbled like dust. Insurance companies, now fully suspicious, sent a specialized fraud team to Venezuela. These investigators had unraveled countless scams, but none as bizarre or tangled as this one. Their journey took them from remote villages to makeshift offices, interviewing officials, former employees, and residents who lived near the supposed clinic. The truth emerged quickly and dramatically. The cremation manager admitted he had never seen a body. For a handful of cash, he swept debris and ashes from the ground, packaged them into an urn, and handed it over as if it contained human remains. He didn't know whose ashes they were. They could have been from burned wood, garbage, anything. The doctor who signed Elias's death certificate confessed he had never met him. He'd been paid to sign a form and stamp it, a forgery disguised as official documentation. Piece by piece, investigators collected evidence that Elias Lantigua was not dead at all. Every signature, every seal, every statement tied back to bribery, forgery, or outright fabrication. And while the insurance team was reconstructing the false death, attorneys in the United States were uncovering the collapse of Elias's business empire. His company was drowning in debt. He was desperate, cornered, and motivated by financial ruin. His fake death wasn't a tragic medical event. It was a calculated escape route. But even as investigators gathered irrefutable proof, Elias was not hiding offshore anymore. In fact, he was already making the boldest and most reckless move of his entire scheme. He was back in the United States, silently slipping into his old life, watching the unfolding investigation like a spectator at his own crime scene. It was only a matter of time before one mistake brought the entire house of cards crashing down. While investigators were tearing apart the lies in Venezuela, Elias was quietly moving back into the country he was supposed to be. Dead in his return wasn't dramatic. No private jet, no secret tunnels. Just a simple smuggling boat from the Bahamas to Florida. From there, he blended into everyday life, taking a bus to Jacksonville like an ordinary traveler. It was almost absurd. A man the world believed to be cremated into ashes was sitting anonymously in an airport shuttle, breathing freely, watching news updates about his own death. He stayed hidden in the couple's mountain home, the same one he'd renovated with a mysterious panic room months earlier. That room, cold, windowless, fortified, became his hideout whenever anyone visited. If Daphne's children came by, Elias would slip away to a nearby hotel or retreat into the steel-lined chamber beneath the cabin floor. He was a ghost, living in his own house, watching the world grieve him while he existed only in shadows. But Elias wasn't content with hiding forever. He wanted a new life, a new name, a new identity. And this ambition would lead him straight into the mistake that exposed everything. He applied for a passport under the identity of a real man. He disguised himself with a brown toupee, oversized glasses, and a fake goatee. He thought these cheap props would protect him from modern surveillance and biometric checks. But his errors were so spectacularly careless they almost didn't seem real. His first mistake: he listed the exact address of his North Carolina mountain home on the application, the same address investigators had already connected to him. His second mistake: he listed Daphne, his supposedly grieving widow, as his emergency contact, essentially tying the fake identity back to his own wife. But the final mistake was the nail in the coffin: his handwriting. It matched his original passport documents perfectly. He had tried to reinvent himself using the same penmanship he'd used for decades. When the application reached the passport office, the facial recognition software flagged him instantly. Even with the cheap wig and fake beard, his facial structure matched the deceased man they had on file that triggered a mandatory alert. Federal agents stepped in quietly, placing him under surveillance. They watched him for more than a year, tracking his movements, documenting every location, every suspected safe house, every time he slinked back into the panic room. Agents wanted airtight evidence before moving in. They studied his routines, his patterns, his hiding places. Elias was cautious, but not nearly cautious enough. After all, he believed he had outsmarted entire governments. He had no idea he was being followed in real time. The end came in the most ordinary way. Elias walked into a repair shop to pick up his car, a simple errand, no disguise, no panic room. Federal agents surrounded him before he even reached the counter. He didn't fight. He didn't run. It was as if he knew the web he'd spun had finally tightened around him. Meanwhile, Daphne had no idea the full truth had unraveled. When agents confronted her, she was still clinging to the lies Elias had drilled into her. The cartel hit, the danger, the need to protect the family. Her fear ran so deep that she repeated his story word for word, still believing she was keeping her loved ones alive. But investigators had overwhelming proof. They arrested her on the spot for conspiracy. Elias's empire of deceit had finally collapsed, and the shrapnel had torn through everyone who believed in him. Now the truth was out, but the consequences were only just beginning. The moment investigators realized the truth, the tone of the entire case changed. What started as a missing person mystery and a suspicious disappearance now turned into a full-scale international manhunt for a man who was never dead to begin with. But as agents closed in, they weren't just chasing a fugitive. They were chasing a man who had rehearsed his escape for years. He had memorized routes, safe houses, cover identities, and fallback plans. On paper, he seemed unstoppable. But reality doesn't bend for long, not even for the smartest criminals. His strategy was to reach the border, blend into the heavy flow of travelers, and vanish into a neighboring country where he had already set up a rental property under an alias. But what he didn't know was that his fake death certificate had triggered an international insurance alert. His airline booking, under a slightly mismatched passport, raised another flag. And by the time he crossed through the second checkpoint, every major agency already had his face, his aliases, and his patterns pinned to their screens. Still, he pushed forward. He switched cars twice, changed clothes in a gas station bathroom, and even used a pre-planned disguise kit hidden inside a storm drain. He altered his voice, his posture, his walking style, everything. But the one thing he couldn't change was time. Every hour he spent running, investigators spent studying him, learning him, predicting him, and eventually the pressure forced him to make the mistake they were waiting for. He contacted someone he should have never contacted, someone from his old life. A single encrypted message, sent from a device he believed untraceable, was all it took. Within minutes, that phone's location bounced through towers and satellites, narrowing his exact position. Agents moved quietly, surrounding the small cabin he had rented years ago for emergencies. The cabin was deep inside the forest, hidden behind a wall of pine trees, with no neighbors for miles. He thought it was the perfect place to hide. Instead, it became the final page of his story. Inside, he sat at a wooden table, flipping through a stack of documents, new identities, new bank cards, new plans. He had no idea the outside world was closing in like a tightening net. By the time he sensed a shift, maybe the distant crunch of boots on leaves, maybe the faint reflection of a scope's glint, it was already too late. Lights burst through the windows. Commands echoed through megaphones. Helicopters chopped the air above the tree line. He tried to run, but there was nowhere left to go. The arrest was quick, silent, almost anticlimactic. After all the years of plotting, all the lies and forged papers and staged scenes, it ended with a pair of cold metal cuffs and a man finally out of ideas. As he was escorted to the waiting vehicles, he didn't fight, didn't shout, didn't give speeches about innocence or guilt. He simply lowered his head, as though even he finally understood that his perfect fake death had brought him to a very real ending. Back home, the truth spread through the community like wildfire. Shock turned into anger, betrayal into closure. For his wife, it wasn't just the end of a criminal escape, it was the end of a life built on illusions. For investigators, it became one of the most astonishing cases they had ever closed. And for us, it's a reminder that no matter how elaborate a lie is, the truth has a way of catching up, every single time.